Sarah Mitchell stood barely 5 feet tall and weighed just 98 pounds soaking wet. At 23 years old, she looked more like a high school student than someone trying to join the military. The recruitment officer at the Army base in Tennessee looked her up and down with obvious doubt written across his weathered face. "Miss, are you sure you're in the right place?" Sergeant Williams asked, glancing at the paperwork she had filled out. "The flower shop is down the street if you're looking for work." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm here to enlist, sir. I want to serve my country as a combat medic." The sergeant let out a short laugh that echoed through the small office. "Sweetheart, I've seen grown men twice your size wash out of basic training. You look like a strong wind could knock you over. This isn't a game." But Sarah had heard these comments her entire life. Growing up on a small farm in rural Tennessee, she had been the smallest kid in every class, the last one picked for sports teams, and the one everyone assumed couldn't handle physical work. What they didn't know was that she had been helping her father run their farm since she was 8 years old. She could lift hay bales, wrangle cattle, and work from sunrise to sunset without complaint. Her older brother Jake had joined the Marines 2 years earlier and was already deployed overseas. Her parents had been proud but worried sick. When Sarah announced her intention to enlist, her mother had cried for 3 days straight. "Women don't belong in combat zones," her father had said firmly. "It's too dangerous, especially for someone your size." Sarah had spent months preparing for this moment. She ran 5 miles every morning before dawn, did hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups, and studied medical textbooks until her eyes burned. She wasn't going to let anyone's doubts stop her from following her brother into service. The recruitment office felt cold and intimidating, with its gray walls covered in posters showing strong, confident soldiers. Sarah felt tiny standing there, but she refused to back down. She had grown up watching her grandmother, who had worked as a nurse during World War II, tell stories about saving lives under impossible conditions. "I know I don't look like much," Sarah said, meeting the sergeant's eyes directly, "but I'm stronger than I appear and I'm not afraid of hard work. My test scores are excellent and I've been training for months. I just want a chance to prove myself." Sergeant Williams studied her for a long moment. He had seen plenty of recruits come through his office over the years. Some were big and tough-looking but cracked under pressure. Others seemed unlikely but surprised everyone with their determination. Something in this small woman's eyes told him she wasn't going to give up easily. "The physical requirements don't change just because you're determined," he warned. "You'll need to pass the same tests as everyone else. No special treatment." "I wouldn't want special treatment," Sarah replied firmly. "I want to earn my place just like everyone else." The sergeant shrugged and handed her a stack of additional paperwork. "Your funeral, kid. Basic training starts in 6 weeks. You better use that time to bulk up, because drill sergeants don't care about your feelings." As Sarah walked out of the recruitment office that day, she felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had cleared the first hurdle, but she knew the real challenges were just beginning. That evening, she called her brother Jake, who was stationed in Germany at the time. "They think I'm too small," she told him over the crackling phone connection. Jake's familiar laugh came through the static. "They thought the same thing about me, sis. Remember when Coach Peterson said I was too short to play varsity football? You just have to show them what you're made of." Sarah smiled, remembering how her brother had not only made the team but became their starting quarterback. If Jake could prove the doubters wrong, so could she. She hung up the phone that night more determined than ever to succeed, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The bus ride to Fort Benning, Georgia, felt like the longest journey of Sarah's life. She sat squeezed between 2 massive recruits who looked like they could bench press a truck. One was a former college football player from Texas, and the other had worked construction since he was 16. They barely acknowledged her presence, talking over her head about their workout routines and how easy basic training was going to be. When they arrived at the base, the drill sergeants were waiting like hungry wolves. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez had arms like tree trunks and a voice that could wake the dead. He took one look at Sarah and shook his head. "What do we have here? Did someone's little sister get lost?" He bellowed. "This is the United States Army, not a daycare center." The other recruit snickered, but Sarah kept her mouth shut and her eyes forward. She had expected this reaction and was prepared for it. The first week of basic training was a nightmare of early mornings, endless physical exercise, and constant shouting. Every day, Sarah struggled to keep up with the bigger, stronger recruits. During the first physical fitness test, she barely passed the minimum requirements. While other recruits cranked out push-ups easily, Sarah had to fight for every single one. Her arms shook with exhaustion and sweat poured down her face as she struggled to complete the required number. "Mitchell," Drill Sergeant Rodriguez screamed. "You're holding up the entire platoon. Maybe you should consider a nice desk job instead." But Sarah gritted her teeth and kept going. That night, while other recruits relaxed or wrote letters home, she was in the bathroom doing extra push-ups and sit-ups. Her muscles ached constantly and her hands were covered in blisters, but she refused to quit. The other recruits began to notice her determination. Martinez, the former football player, found her doing exercises late one night. "You don't have to prove anything to us," he said quietly. "Everyone knows you're trying your hardest." Sarah looked up from her push-up position, breathing heavily. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you guys. I'm trying to prove it to myself." The obstacle course was Sarah's biggest challenge. It included rope climbing, wall scaling, and crawling under barbed wire through mud. The first time she attempted it, she failed miserably. She couldn't make it over the 8-foot wall and got tangled in the rope climb. Some recruits finished the course in under 10 minutes, while Sarah took almost 20. "Mitchell, my grandmother could beat your time, and she's been dead for 15 years. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez shouted. "You're dragging down the entire unit." That night, Sarah snuck out to the obstacle course and practiced in the dark. She studied how the faster recruits approached each obstacle and worked on her technique. She discovered that while she lacked brute strength, she could use her small size and flexibility to her advantage. Instead of powering over obstacles, she learned to find creative ways around them. The medical training portion of basic training was where Sarah truly began to shine. While other recruits struggled with the complex procedures and medical terminology, Sarah absorbed everything like a sponge. She had always been good with her hands and had a natural instinct for helping people. During a practice scenario where recruits had to treat simulated battlefield injuries, Sarah's calm demeanor and steady hands impressed even the toughest instructors. While bigger recruits panicked under pressure, Sarah methodically worked through each step of treatment with precision and confidence. "You know what you're doing," Mitchell, the medical instructor, Sergeant Foster, told her after one particularly challenging exercise. "You might be small, but you've got the right instincts for this job." As the weeks passed, Sarah slowly began earning respect from her fellow recruits. They saw how she never complained, never asked for help, and always pushed herself to improve. When Martinez injured his ankle during a training exercise, Sarah was the first one to help him, expertly wrapping his ankle and helping him to the medical station. The final physical fitness test arrived faster than anyone expected. Sarah had been training relentlessly, and her times had improved dramatically. She still wasn't the fastest or strongest recruit, but she had proven that determination could make up for a lot. As she prepared for the test that would determine whether she graduated from basic training, Sarah thought about everyone who had doubted her. The recruitment officer, the drill sergeants, and even some of her fellow recruits had assumed she would wash out. But she was still here, still fighting, and ready to prove that being small didn't mean being weak. Graduation day from basic training felt surreal to Sarah. Standing in formation with her platoon, wearing her crisp new uniform, she could hardly believe she had made it through. The same drill sergeants who had screamed at her for weeks now shook her hand with genuine respect. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez even cracked a smile when he handed her the graduation certificate. "You surprised me, Mitchell," he said quietly. "I thought you'd be on a bus home after the first week. You've got more fight in you than recruits twice your size." Her parents had driven down from Tennessee for the ceremony, and Sarah could see tears in her mother's eyes as she watched her daughter march across the stage. Her father, who had been so worried about her joining the military, now stood tall with pride. Advanced individual training for combat medics took place at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. The medical training was intense and comprehensive, covering everything from basic first aid to advanced trauma surgery. Sarah excelled in every aspect of the program, quickly becoming one of the top students in her class. The instructors pushed them hard, creating realistic battlefield scenarios where they had to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for staying calm in chaotic situations. While other students panicked when faced with multiple casualties and simulated explosions, Sarah methodically triaged patients and administered treatment with steady hands. "Mitchell, you've got ice water in your veins," her instructor, Captain Thompson, told her after a particularly challenging exercise. "That's exactly what you need in a real combat situation." During one training scenario, they simulated a roadside bomb attack with multiple casualties. Fake blood covered the training mannequins and speakers blared the sounds of gunfire and explosions. Many students froze or made critical errors under the stress. But Sarah moved efficiently from patient to patient, quickly assessing injuries and prioritizing treatment. Her small size, which had been seen as a weakness in basic training, became an advantage in medical situations. She could maneuver in tight spaces, crawl under debris to reach injured soldiers, and her gentle touch was comforting to patients in distress. Her classmates began seeking her out for help with difficult procedures and study sessions. After completing medical training, Sarah received her orders for deployment. She was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division and would be stationed in Afghanistan. The news was both exciting and terrifying. Everything she had trained for was about to become real. Her brother Jake was now serving his second deployment in Iraq, and they managed to talk on the phone before Sarah shipped out. His voice sounded different now, older and more serious than she remembered. "It's not like the training, sis," he warned her. "Everything happens faster and there's no do-overs. Just remember what they taught you and trust your instincts." Sarah arrived at Bagram Airfield on a transport plane filled with nervous soldiers. The Afghanistan landscape looked harsh and unforgiving from the air, all brown earth and jagged mountains. The heat hit her like a wall when she stepped off the plane, and the smell of dust and diesel fuel filled her nostrils. She was assigned to Forward Operating Base Shank in Logar Province, one of the most dangerous areas in Afghanistan. The base was surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire, and the constant threat of rocket attacks kept everyone on edge. Sarah's first week was spent getting oriented to the base layout and meeting her unit. Staff Sergeant Mike Thompson, a veteran medic from North Carolina, was assigned as her mentor. He had been deployed 3 times and had seen more combat than most soldiers twice his age. When he first met Sarah, his expression was skeptical. "They're sending us kids now?" he muttered, looking at her youthful face and small frame. "How old are you anyway?" 24, Sergeant, Sarah replied firmly, "and I'm here to do my job." Thompson spent the next few days testing her knowledge and skills, throwing every medical scenario he could think of at her. Sarah answered every question correctly and demonstrated her procedures flawlessly. Slowly, his skepticism began to turn into cautious approval. "You know your stuff," he admitted after she successfully treated a soldier with a simulated sucking chest wound. "Let's see how you handle yourself when the real bullets start flying." Sarah didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, the base sirens wailed as incoming rockets struck the perimeter. It was her first taste of real combat, and as she crouched in the bunker listening to explosions echoing across the compound, she wondered if she was truly ready for what lay ahead. The first rocket attack lasted only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours to Sarah. She crouched in the concrete bunker with a dozen other soldiers, listening to the whistle of incoming rockets and the thunderous explosions that followed. Her hands shook slightly and she gripped her medical bag tighter to steady herself. When the all-clear siren finally sounded, everyone emerged cautiously from the bunkers. Smoke rose from several areas of the base and the acrid smell of explosives hung in the air. Fortunately, the rockets had hit empty buildings and storage areas, with no casualties reported. "Welcome to Afghanistan," Staff Sergeant Thompson said dryly as they walked back to the medical station. "That was just the enemy saying hello. Wait until they really want to get your attention." Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into the routine of base life. She treated soldiers for everything from heat exhaustion and food poisoning to minor injuries from training exercises. The work was steady but not particularly challenging, and she began to wonder if she would ever face the kind of intense combat situations she had trained for. Her opportunity came sooner than expected. In late September, her unit was tasked with providing medical support for a convoy mission to deliver supplies to a remote outpost in the mountains. The route was known to be dangerous with frequent ambushes and roadside bombs, but the outpost desperately needed food and ammunition. The convoy consisted of 6 heavily armored vehicles carrying supplies, ammunition, and a medical team. Sarah was assigned to the 3rd vehicle along with Thompson and 2 other medics. As they prepared to leave the base, Thompson pulled her aside for a final briefing. "This isn't training anymore, Mitchell," he said seriously. "If we hit trouble out there, people are going to be depending on you to keep them alive. Are you ready for that?" Sarah checked her equipment one final time and nodded. "I'm ready, Sergeant." The convoy rolled out of the base just after dawn, and for the first hour the mission proceeded smoothly. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful in the morning light, with snow-capped mountains rising majestically in the distance. Sarah had never seen anything like it. "Don't let the scenery fool you," warned Corporal Davis, the vehicle commander. "Those mountains are full of people who want to kill us." As if summoned by his words, the radio crackled to life with urgent chatter from the lead vehicle. They had spotted suspicious activity ahead and were slowing down to investigate. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with nervous energy as their vehicle came to a stop. The explosion, when it came, was deafening. The lead vehicle had triggered a massive roadside bomb buried in the dirt road. The blast sent a column of smoke and debris high into the air, and Sarah could see the twisted wreckage of the armored vehicle through the smoke. "IED. IED," voices screamed over the radio. "We need medical support up front now." Before Sarah could react, Thompson was already moving. "Grab your gear, Mitchell. This is what we trained for." He kicked open the vehicle door and sprinted toward the burning wreckage with Sarah close behind. The scene that greeted them was chaos. The lead vehicle had been thrown off the road and was lying on its side, smoke pouring from its twisted metal frame. Sarah could hear screaming from inside the wreckage, and her training instantly took over. All the fear and nervousness vanished as she focused on the task at hand. 2 casualties visible in the vehicle, Thompson shouted as they approached. "Mitchell, set up triage here. I'm going in to get them out." Sarah quickly established a treatment area behind their vehicle, using it as cover from potential sniper fire. Her hands moved automatically as she laid out medical supplies and prepared for incoming casualties. The first soldier Thompson pulled from the wreckage had severe burns on his arms and face, and Sarah immediately began treating him for shock and pain. The second casualty was worse. Sergeant Williams, the vehicle commander, had a piece of shrapnel embedded in his chest and was losing blood rapidly. Sarah had seen similar injuries during training, but this was different. This was real blood, real pain, and a real person who might die if she made a mistake. "Stay with me, Sergeant," she said calmly as she worked to stabilize his condition. "You're going to be fine. I've got you." As she worked on Williams, gunfire erupted from the surrounding hills. The convoy was under attack from multiple directions, and bullets pinged off the armored vehicles around them. Sarah forced herself to ignore the chaos and concentrate solely on her patients, just as she had been trained to do. The gunfire intensified as enemy fighters positioned in the mountains opened up with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. Bullets whistled overhead, and Sarah could hear them striking the armored vehicles with metallic pings. Despite the chaos around her, she maintained her focus on Sergeant Williams, whose condition was deteriorating rapidly. "Thompson!" she called out as she applied pressure to Williams's chest wound. "I need you to radio for an emergency medical evacuation. This one won't make it back to base without immediate surgery." Thompson was crouched behind another vehicle, treating the burned soldier while simultaneously coordinating the medical response over the radio. "Medevac is 20 minutes out," he shouted back. "Can you keep him stable that long?" Sarah looked down at Williams, whose face was growing pale from blood loss. The shrapnel had punctured his lung, and despite her best efforts, she was fighting a losing battle against internal bleeding. In training, this would have been the point where instructors called the exercise complete, but here there was no reset button. "I'm not going anywhere, Sergeant," she told Williams, whose eyes were starting to lose focus. "Just keep talking to me. Tell me about home." Williams managed a weak smile. "Got a little girl," he whispered. "Just turned 3 last month. She loves horses." Sarah continued working while he talked, using every technique she had learned to slow the bleeding and maintain his vital signs. The sound of gunfire seemed to fade into the background as she concentrated entirely on keeping this man alive for his 3-year-old daughter. Suddenly, a rocket-propelled grenade struck the vehicle directly behind them, and the explosion knocked Sarah to the ground. Her ears were ringing and debris rained down around them, but she immediately scrambled back to Williams's side to check his condition. "Mitchell!" Thompson's voice seemed to come from far away. "We've got more casualties from that RPG hit. I need you over here." Sarah looked around frantically. 3 more soldiers had been injured in the latest explosion, and Thompson was trying to treat all of them simultaneously. She was torn between staying with Williams, who needed constant attention, and helping the other wounded soldiers. In that moment, her small size became an unexpected advantage. She realized she could crawl under the damaged vehicle to reach the new casualties while still maintaining contact with Williams. It was dangerous and unconventional, but it was the only way to treat everyone who needed help. "Sergeant, I'm going to slide under this vehicle to help the others, but I'm keeping one hand on you," she told Williams. "Don't you dare give up on me." What followed was the most challenging 20 minutes of Sarah's life. Lying partially under a damaged vehicle, she managed to treat multiple casualties simultaneously while bullets continued to fly overhead. Her small hands allowed her to reach wounds that would have been impossible for larger medics to access, and her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure proved invaluable. When the medevac helicopter finally arrived, Sarah had stabilized all 5 casualties and prepared them for transport. The helicopter landed in a whirlwind of dust and noise, with the crew chief and flight medic running low toward the casualties. "What do we have?" the flight medic shouted over the rotor noise. Sarah quickly briefed him on each patient's condition, injuries, and treatment administered. Her report was clear, concise, and professional despite the fact that she was covered in blood and dirt from crawling around the battlefield. "Outstanding work," the flight medic said as they loaded Williams onto a stretcher. "This one would have died without your intervention. You saved his life." As the helicopter lifted off with the wounded soldiers, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off, and she realized she had been operating on pure instinct and training for the past hour. Thompson appeared beside her, looking impressed and slightly amazed. "Mitchell, that was some of the best combat medicine I've ever seen. Where did you learn to work like that?" Sarah looked down at her blood-stained hands and uniform. "I guess I learned it from you, Sergeant, and from everyone who believed I could do this job." The convoy managed to complete its mission and return to base without further casualties, but news of Sarah's performance during the ambush spread quickly throughout the unit. Soldiers who had initially been skeptical of the small female medic now looked at her with genuine respect and admiration. Word of the incident reached the base commander, Colonel Martinez, who called Sarah to his office the following day. She stood at attention in front of his desk, still not entirely sure what to expect. "At ease, Specialist Mitchell," he said with a slight smile. "I've been hearing some interesting reports about your performance yesterday. 5 casualties treated simultaneously under heavy fire, with all patients surviving transport to the field hospital. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied simply. "I was just doing my job." Colonel Martinez studied her for a moment. "Specialist, I've been in the Army for 22 years, and I've seen a lot of medics in action. What you did yesterday was exceptional. I'm recommending you for a commendation." 3 weeks after the convoy ambush, Sarah had settled into a new routine at the base. Word of her performance had spread throughout the entire forward operating base, and she found herself being requested specifically for high-risk missions. Soldiers who once questioned her presence now actively sought her out when they needed medical attention, trusting her skills completely. The commendation ceremony was held on a Thursday morning in the base's main courtyard. Colonel Martinez presented Sarah with the Army Commendation Medal in front of the entire unit, reading aloud the citation that described her actions during the ambush. As she stood at attention while the medal was pinned to her uniform, Sarah thought about how far she had come from that first day at the recruitment office. "This medal represents not just individual courage," Colonel Martinez announced to the assembled troops, "but the kind of dedication and skill that makes our entire unit stronger. Specialist Mitchell has proven that heroism comes in all sizes." After the ceremony, Sarah called home to share the news with her parents. Her mother cried tears of joy while her father simply said, "I knew you had it in you, sweetheart. I'm sorry I ever doubted you." Her brother Jake managed to call from Iraq that evening, his voice crackling through the satellite connection. "A commendation medal already? Show off," he joked before his tone became serious. "I'm proud of you, sis. You're doing exactly what you were meant to do." 2 days later, Sarah's biggest test yet arrived in the form of an urgent mission request. A reconnaissance patrol had been ambushed in a remote valley 15 kilometers from the base, and early reports indicated multiple casualties trapped in a dangerous position. The patrol was pinned down by enemy fire and couldn't evacuate on their own. The rescue mission would be led by Captain Rodriguez and include a team of 12 soldiers plus medical support. As they prepared to deploy, Captain Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside for a private briefing. "Mitchell, this is going to be extremely dangerous," he warned. "The patrol is trapped in open ground with limited cover, and we don't know how many enemy fighters are in the area. If you want to stay back and let Thompson handle this one, no one would question that decision." Sarah checked her medical equipment one final time and shouldered her pack. "With respect, sir, those soldiers out there need medical attention, and I'm the best medic you have for this kind of situation. I'm going." The rescue team traveled by helicopter to avoid the roadside bombs that plagued ground convoys. As they flew over the rugged Afghan landscape, Sarah could see the smoke rising from the valley where the patrol was trapped. The sight sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to focus on the mission ahead. They landed 2 kilometers away from the ambush site and moved on foot through rocky terrain to avoid detection. The sound of gunfire grew louder as they approached, and Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of sniper rifles mixed with the chatter of automatic weapons. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, the situation became clear. The reconnaissance patrol was trapped in a dried riverbed with no cover except for a few scattered boulders. Enemy fighters occupied positions on 3 sides of the valley, maintaining constant fire that prevented any movement. "There," Captain Rodriguez pointed to the trapped soldiers below. "I count at least 4 casualties, maybe more. We need to create a diversion to get down there." The plan was simple but risky. Half the rescue team would engage the enemy positions to draw their fire, while the other half, including Sarah, would make their way down into the valley to reach the wounded soldiers. Once the casualties were stabilized, they would have to carry them back up the steep slope to the extraction point. "Remember," Captain Rodriguez told Sarah as they prepared to move, "you focus on the medical side. Let us handle the shooting. Your job is to keep those men alive long enough to get them home." The descent into the valley was terrifying. Sarah had to crawl and slide down rocky slopes while bullets flew overhead, her medical pack bouncing against her back with every movement. Several times enemy fire came so close she could hear the bullets snapping through the air inches from her head. When they finally reached the trapped patrol, the scene was worse than anyone had anticipated. 5 soldiers were wounded, including Sergeant First Class Johnson, the patrol leader, who had taken a bullet in the leg and was struggling to maintain command of his unit while losing blood. "About time you showed up," Johnson said through gritted teeth as Sarah quickly examined his wound. "We've been pinned down here for 3 hours." Sarah immediately went to work, moving from casualty to assess injuries and prioritize treatment. The worst case was Private Martinez, who had been shot in the abdomen and was in danger of bleeding to death. Sarah realized she would need to perform emergency surgery right there in the open valley, under enemy fire, to save his life. The situation in the valley was desperate. Private Martinez was losing blood fast, and Sarah knew she had maybe 10 minutes before his condition became irreversible. Enemy bullets continued to snap overhead while she worked, forcing her to stay low behind the minimal cover of scattered rocks. "I need you to hold pressure here while I work," she told Corporal Williams, one of the uninjured soldiers from the trapped patrol. "Don't let up no matter what happens around us." Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision as she prepared to perform emergency surgery in conditions no medical school could have prepared her for. The procedure required her to expose herself to enemy fire while she worked, but Martinez would die without immediate intervention. As she began the delicate operation, a sniper's bullet struck the rock just inches from her head, sending stone fragments flying. Several soldiers around her flinched and ducked lower, but Sarah never wavered in her concentration. Her world had narrowed to the surgical site in front of her and the steady rhythm of Martinez's weakening pulse. "Mitchell, we need to move," Captain Rodriguez shouted from nearby. "Enemy reinforcements are coming up the valley. We have maybe 5 minutes before this position becomes impossible to defend." "I need 3 more minutes," Sarah called back without looking up from her work. "I'm almost done here." Those 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. Enemy fire intensified as more fighters moved into position, and Sarah could hear the rescue team returning fire with increasing desperation. Sergeant Johnson, despite his own wounds, was directing defensive fire while Sarah worked to save Martinez's life. Finally, Sarah completed the emergency procedure and quickly bandaged the surgical site. "He's stable for transport," she announced, "but we need to move him carefully." The evacuation up the rocky slope was a nightmare of coordination and courage. Sarah and 2 other soldiers carried Martinez on an improvised stretcher, while the rest of the team provided covering fire. Her small size became crucial again, as she was able to navigate the narrow passages between rocks that larger soldiers couldn't manage while carrying a stretcher. Halfway up the slope, enemy fighters launched a final assault on their position. Sarah found herself lying flat behind a boulder with bullets striking all around them, still maintaining pressure on Martinez's wound while Captain Rodriguez coordinated their defense. "We're not going to make it at this rate," Corporal Davis said grimly as he reloaded his weapon. "There are too many of them." Sarah looked at the wounded soldiers around her, then at the steep slope they still had to climb. In that moment, she made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. "Give me covering fire for 30 seconds, she told Captain Rodriguez. "I'm going to get these men to the top." Before anyone could object, Sarah had grabbed Martinez under the arms and begun dragging him up the slope. Her small frame seemed impossible for such a task, but adrenaline and determination gave her superhuman strength. Other soldiers quickly followed her lead, grabbing the remaining casualties and beginning the desperate climb to safety. What followed was an incredible display of courage and teamwork. Sarah made 3 separate trips down the slope, each time returning with another wounded soldier. On her final trip, she helped carry Sergeant Johnson, who had lost consciousness from blood loss and exhaustion. When they finally reached the extraction point, the rescue helicopter was already waiting with rotors spinning. Sarah helped load each casualty aboard, briefing the flight medic on their conditions and treatment administered. As the helicopter lifted off with the wounded soldiers, she collapsed against a rock. "Completely exhausted, Mitchell," Captain Rodriguez said as he approached her. "In 15 years of military service, I have never seen anything like what you just did. You single-handedly saved 3 lives today, and probably saved our entire mission." The rescue operation became legendary throughout the base, and eventually throughout the entire theater of operations. Sarah's actions that day earned her the Bronze Star Medal with Valor, one of the highest decorations for battlefield heroism. More importantly, all 5 wounded soldiers survived their injuries and eventually returned to duty or made full recoveries at home. 6 months later, as Sarah's deployment neared its end, she received a letter from Private Martinez, who was recovering at a military hospital in Germany. The letter was simple but powerful. "You gave me the chance to see my family again. I will never forget what you did for me in that valley." When Sarah finally returned home to Tennessee, she was greeted as a hero. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about her service, and the mayor presented her with a key to the city. But the moment that meant the most came when she walked into her family's farmhouse and saw her parents' faces. "We always knew you were special," her mother said through tears as she hugged her daughter, "but we never imagined how many lives you would save." Sarah's father, who had once worried that she was too small and frail for military service, simply smiled and said, "I guess size doesn't matter when you have a heart that big." Years later, Sarah would go on to serve 2 more deployments and eventually become a senior medic training the next generation of combat medics. She never forgot the lessons learned in that Afghan valley, or the importance of proving that courage and determination matter more than physical size. The woman who had been written off as too frail had become one of the most decorated medics in her unit's history, saving dozens of lives and earning the respect of every soldier who served alongside her. Her story became an inspiration to countless others who were told they weren't big enough, strong enough, or tough enough to make a difference. Today, retired Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell works as a trauma surgeon at a major hospital, where she continues to save lives every day. The skills she learned on the battlefields of Afghanistan serve her well in the emergency room, and she often tells young medical students that the most important qualification for being a healer isn't physical strength. It's the determination to never give up on another human being. On the wall of her office hangs a photo from that day in the Afghan valley, showing her helping to load wounded soldiers into the rescue helicopter. Below it is a simple plaque with the words that have guided her entire career. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it." The recruitment officer who had once suggested she try the flower shop instead of the military would hardly recognize the confident, accomplished woman Sarah had become. But Sarah herself knows that the seeds of her heroism were always there, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Sometimes the greatest strength comes in the smallest packages, and sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change everything. Her story serves as a reminder that in a world quick to judge based on appearances, True courage has nothing to do with size and everything to do with the size of one's heart. Sarah Mitchell had proven that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage of all, especially when you're determined to prove everyone wrong.